8:06 a.m. Vivian Hart watched the glass turn her reflection into a faint overlay. Her face, her ID photo, her name. Then the reader flashed red like it had decided she wasn't real. She tried once more, slower, like you do when you want the machine to be wrong on record. Read again. Behind the security desk, the guard didn't look surprised. He looked instructed. "Try the side entrance," he said, already reaching for a visitor badge he shouldn't have had ready. Vivian didn't move. Her laptop bag sat heavy against her shoulder, the strap cutting a clean line across her blazer. Inside that bag was a plain black notebook, the kind you buy in bulk because it doesn't invite questions. Tucked into the back pocket of the notebook was a small silver USB drive with no label. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just something you kept when you learned that corporate memory was selective. 8:07 a.m. Her phone lit up with a calendar cancellation. Quarterly stability sync. Host, Gavin Rhodes. The meeting had existed yesterday. Today it had been revised out of reality. A second notification followed, softer. An email from HR, subject line, quick alignment, today. No body yet. Just the subject. Like a hand on the back steering her toward a room she hadn't agreed to enter. Vivian looked through the glass into the lobby where the company's brand words were mounted in brushed steel. Clarity, control, confidence. They were the kind of words you could spend millions on and still never mean. Behind that wall, Latticebridge Capital was already awake, phones ringing, keyboards ticking, espresso machines hissing like small controlled fires. The firm provided institutional stability to asset managers who needed trades settled cleanly, reconciled fast, and reported with the kind of precision that kept regulators bored. Vivian had built half the controls that made that possible, and now the building was pretending she didn't belong to it. 8:09 a.m. Quinn Hale texted her from inside. "Quinn, your badge too. Mine worked. They're saying access cleanup on the floor. Something's off. Are you okay?" Quinn was a junior analyst, sharp, quiet, always watching the room instead of trying to own it. Vivian had hired her because she trusted people who asked better questions than they answered. Vivian typed back with one hand. 8:10 a.m., she wrote. "Don't speculate. Screenshot anything that changes. Meet me at 12:20 p.m. offsite. Same place." She didn't add emotion. She didn't add fear. Silence was not surrender. It was camouflage. The visitor badge sat on the counter between them like a compromise. The guard slid it toward her with 2 fingers, the way you slide something you don't want to touch. "HR said you're expected," he said. Expected. Not invited. Not wanted. Just expected. Like a cleanup task in someone else's workflow. Vivian picked up the visitor badge and turned it over. The plastic was warm from his hand. The printed line read, V. Hart, guest, guest. A word that reclassified your past contributions as a temporary arrangement. 8:12 a.m. She walked through the metal detectors under the quiet gaze of a camera she'd helped install for compliance reasons, and the lobby swallowed her into its curated calm. White marble, indirect lighting, the polished lie of stability. On the far side of the lobby, behind a frosted glass conference room, she saw a figure waiting. Gavin Rhodes, head of operations strategy. A man whose talent was making decisions sound like consensus. He stood with a folder in his hand, posture relaxed, like he was early to a meeting he'd scheduled for someone else. Beside him sat Maris Calder from HR, pen already uncapped, eyes on her tablet like she was preparing to document a weather event. 8:14 a.m., Vivian stepped into the glass conference room, and the door shut behind her with the soft finality of policy. Gavin smiled without warmth. "Vivian," he said, stretching her name into something performative. "Thanks for coming in. We want to streamline a few things today. Minimize exposure. Keep the optics stable." Vivian set her laptop bag down, carefully, as if the table were evidence. She didn't sit yet. She looked at the folder. "What is this?" she asked. Maris didn't look up. "A brief recap of recent performance concerns," she said, voice neutral, like a pre-recorded message. Gavin slid the folder across the table. "It's not personal. It's alignment." Vivian opened it. The first page was a termination notice, already printed, already signed by someone who wasn't in the room. The second page was a transition plan that referred to her role as if it were already vacant. Then she saw the third page, a single paragraph titled, Root Cause Summary, Q4 Reporting Variance. And under it, one sentence, clean, confident, false. Variance driven by inadequate oversight within settlement controls, owned by Vivian Hart. Vivian didn't blink. She didn't inhale sharply. She didn't give them the reaction they'd built this room to harvest. She read it again, slower. Inadequate oversight. Owned by Vivian Hart. This wasn't a firing. It was a narrative. And narratives were the only currencies some people knew how to steal with. 8:18 a.m. She closed the folder and looked at Gavin as if he were a dashboard she was learning to distrust. You're assigning root cause, she said, without an audit trail. Gavin's smile tightened. We're not assigning, we're acknowledging. The board wants stability. Clients want confidence. We need a clean story. A clean story. Vivian let that phrase settle in the air like dust. Then she nodded once, small and controlled. If you want clean, she said, you'll need accuracy. Maris finally looked up. Vivian, this is a standard separation. Severance is generous. We'd like to keep this calm. Vivian stared at the HR pen in Maris's hand. It was a simple black pen, cheap, corporate issue, replaceable. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her own pen. Silver, slightly worn. A gift from her father when she passed her first licensing exam years ago. It wasn't expensive. It was personal. It wrote clean lines. She held it between her fingers like a decision. 8:21 a.m. She signed nothing. She didn't refuse either. She simply said, send it to me, I'll review. Gavin leaned back, relieved. That's reasonable. He thought her calm was compliance. He mistook restraint for defeat. Vivian stood, slid the folder back without pushing it, and zipped her laptop bag with a soft mechanical sound that felt like closure. 8:23 a.m. As she walked out of the glass room, her phone buzzed again. Another calendar change, another meeting removed, another thread pulled loose. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She already knew what this was. They weren't trying to remove her. They were trying to remove her credibility. And that meant there was something in the system that couldn't survive daylight. Vivian walked through the lobby like a guest with perfect posture. Outside, the winter air hit her face and made her eyes water, not from emotion, but from temperature. 8:28 a.m. She got into her car and didn't drive away right away. She opened her notebook on the passenger seat to a page filled with small, neat handwriting, dates, report IDs, reconciliation notes, and one line circled twice. Variance appears in footnote roll forward, not in headline totals. The kind of detail most people never read, the kind of detail that could kill careers quietly. Vivian slid her thumb over the edge of the silver USB tucked behind the notebook. It was still there. Not a weapon. A mirror. She stared forward, engine off, hands steady. Absence is the cleanest form of revenge. But first, accuracy had to do its work. And accuracy required one thing before anything else: time. 9:41 a.m. Vivian Hart sat alone at a corner table of a quiet cafe, 2 blocks from Lattice Bridge Capital. The kind of place executives never noticed because nothing strategic ever happened there, until it did. She opened her laptop without connecting to Wi-Fi. That habit wasn't paranoia. It was hygiene. The screen glowed softly as she plugged in the small silver USB. No logo, no label, just capacity. Inside it lived copies, report snapshots, version histories, time-stamped exports. Nothing illegal, nothing stolen, everything preserved at the moment it was created. Evidence didn't need drama, it needed integrity. 9:46 a.m. She pulled up the Q4 client reporting package, the same one cited in the root cause summary Gavin had slid across the table like a verdict. The headline numbers were clean. They always were. Totals reconciled. Balances matched. That was why the accusation worked on paper. She didn't look at totals. She scrolled. Down past the executive summary. past the charts designed for confidence, past the language that said stability without proving it. She stopped at the footnotes. Footnotes were where liability hid when it wanted to look cooperative. 9:53 a.m. Vivian Hart highlighted a single line in the roll-forward disclosure, 3 decimals out of alignment with the prior quarter. Not material, not loud, but wrong. A rounding variance didn't repeat across unrelated instruments unless something upstream was forcing it. She cross-checked the timestamp. The adjustment appeared after the automated settlement close, but before the client-facing report was generated. That window was narrow, and it didn't belong to her team. 10:02 a.m. She opened the system access logs she'd archived months earlier, back when she'd first noticed the numbers behaving strangely, but not dangerously. At the time, she'd logged it as monitor. Now it was context. One user ID appeared consistently in that window. Always clean, always approved, always invisible in summaries. Gavin Rhodes didn't touch data directly. He didn't need to. But someone reporting into his strategic optimization pod did. 10:11 a.m. Vivian Hart wrote one line in her notebook. Slow and deliberate. Variance introduced post-settlement, pre-report. Ownership misattributed. She underlined misattributed once. Then she waited. Waiting wasn't passive. Waiting was letting systems reveal their habits. 10:28 a.m. Her phone vibrated. No sound. A text from Quinn. Quinn. They just reassigned 2 of your controls to strategy ops. No announcement. Just changed ownership in the dashboard. Vivian didn't reply immediately. She took a sip of coffee that had gone cold without her noticing. 10:31 a.m. She typed back, screenshot before / after. Don't forward. Save locally. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. 10:33 a.m. Quinn replied, already done. Also, one of the footnotes changed language this morning. Operational variance became oversight lapse. There it was, language drift, the quietest form of blame migration. Vivian Hart closed her eyes, not in stress, but in confirmation. They weren't fixing a problem. They were editing a story. 10:41 a.m. She pulled up the earlier version of the footnote from her archive. Same numbers, different words. Words didn't settle trades, but they decided who paid when trades failed. She opened a new document and began a timeline. Not emotional, not accusatory, just factual. Date/time system state data owner, narrative change, no adjectives. Accuracy didn't need them. 11:02 a.m. She noticed something else, something smaller than the variance itself. A reference code in the footnote that didn't exist in the main ledger. It pointed outward. To an external reconciliation service, Lattice Bridge had onboarded quietly 3 months earlier under the banner of streamlining. Strategy Ops' favorite word. 11:14 a.m. Vivian Hart traced the code to a vendor appendix no one ever read because it lived beyond page 40. There, in plain text, was a disclaimer. Adjustments applied post-close may not be reflected in automated control ownership. Not her language, not her process. But her name sat downstream of it anyway. She leaned back, letting the chair creak once. This wasn't incompetence. It was insulation. 11:32 a.m. She closed her laptop and slid the notebook back into her bag. The silver pen followed, clipped neatly into place like it had always known where it belonged. The first crack wasn't the variance. It was the assumption that no one would read the footnotes twice, or compare versions, or care enough to preserve the moment before the story changed. They thought speed would save them. But accuracy had memory. And memory was patient. 11:47 a.m. Vivian Hart stood, paid in cash, and walked out into the street without checking her phone. She didn't need more information yet. She needed the system to keep doing what it always did when people got careless. She needed them to keep moving. 1:09 p.m. Vivian Hart received the calendar alert while she was walking. No chime, just a vibration that felt intentional. Subject, operational alignment. Ad hoc. Host, Gavin Rhodes. Attendees, strategy ops, finance, risk status, optional meant decided. Her name wasn't on the invite list. She stopped at the curb and opened the details anyway. There it was, buried under FYI recipients, spelled correctly, tagged lightly, like an afterthought that wanted deniability. This wasn't exclusion. It was positioning. 1:12 p.m. Vivian Hart forwarded the invite to herself and saved a PDF copy. Calendar metadata mattered more than people admitted. Then she did nothing. No reply, no decline, no visible resistance. Silence was not surrender. It was camouflage. 1:37 p.m. The meeting started without her. She knew because the internal messaging platform lit up, not with questions, but with tone shifts. People stopped using verbs. Sentences got shorter. Screenshots appeared without commentary. Quinn again. Quinn. They're talking about oversight gaps. Slide deck has your org name on it. 1:39 p.m. Vivian Hart replied, "Save deck version if you can. Don't react." A pause. Then, "Already downloaded. They changed slide 7 mid-meeting." Of course they did. Live edits were a tell. 1:44 p.m. Vivian Hart opened her laptop at a standing desk near the window. She didn't sit. Sitting implied permanence. She pulled the archived version of the deck from the previous quarter, the one she'd helped review when it was still honest. Slide 7 then. Post-close adjustments introduced by third-party reconciliation layer. Slide 7 now. Operational oversight within settlement controls. Same data, different gravity. 1:52 p.m. Her inbox refreshed. An email from Gavin. Subject: quick clarification. The body was short by design. Vivian, looping you in for visibility. During today's alignment, your team's controls were referenced in relation to the Q4 variance. No action needed right now, just wanted you aware in case questions come up later. Appreciate your flexibility as we streamline. Visibility. A word executives used when they wanted to appear fair without being accurate. 1:55 p.m. Vivian Hart read it twice. Then once more for what it didn't say. No attachment, no specifics, no acknowledgement of ownership change. But her name was now part of the written record. That was the trap. If she replied emotionally, she'd validate the narrative. If she replied defensively, she'd look exposed. If she didn't reply at all, the silence could be reinterpreted. So she replied with alignment. 1:58 p.m., she typed. Gavin, thanks for the visibility. For accuracy, please confirm which specific controls and timestamps were referenced, and whether this reflects a change in documented ownership. Happy to review once details are clear. Vivian. No accusation, no tone, just precision. 2:03 p.m. She archived the sent email and exported it as a PDF. Then she waited. Waiting forced people to choose between speed and truth. They almost always chose speed. 2:17 p.m. Another message from Quinn. They just sent a follow-up to finance, CC'd you, saying Vivian's group will ensure remediation. No remediation plan attached. There it was. The email gavel. 2:20 p.m. Vivian Hart opened the CC'd thread. The language was smooth, professional, final. It didn't ask her to fix anything. It announced that she already was. She scrolled to the bottom. The footer timestamp mattered. The email was sent 6 minutes before her clarification request. They weren't waiting for facts. They were laying rails. 2:24 p.m. She added the email to her timeline document and highlighted one phrase. Will ensure remediation. Future tense. Assign certainty. No evidence. She didn't reply. She saved. 2:41 p.m. Vivian Hart unplugged the USB and slipped it back behind the notebook, careful not to smudge the metal. Fingerprints were for crime scenes, not corporate exits. She looked out the window at the city moving. People crossing streets on green lights that meant nothing once you learned who controlled the signals. This wasn't about firing her. It was about insulating someone else before an external review surfaced, which meant one thing was now guaranteed. An audit was coming, not announced, not requested, but inevitable. Systems like Lattice Bridge didn't change language this fast unless someone upstairs had felt pressure from outside. Client, regulator, or both. 2:58 p.m. Vivian Hart closed her laptop and wrote a final line for the afternoon. Trap confirmed. Narrative locked. Do not interrupt. She underlined, do not. Absence would do more damage than rebuttal ever could. Because once a story was published internally, the only thing that could kill it wasn't protest. It was proof. And proof needed patience. 7:22 a.m. Vivian Hart woke before the alarm and lay still, listening to the quiet mechanics of the city starting up. Elevators humming, distant traffic sinking into lanes. Silence, she had learned, wasn't empty. It was structured. She didn't check her phone yet. Checking too early meant letting someone else set the rhythm. 7:41 a.m. She brewed coffee and opened her notebook at the kitchen counter, flipping to a page already half-filled. Not with feelings, but with columns. Event, source, timestamp, version change, beneficiary. No conclusions, just gravity. 7:58 a.m. Vivian Hart powered on her laptop and connected to the network for the first time since the cafe. Notifications flooded in. Calendar nudges, internal threads, passive-aggressive optimism. She ignored all of it. Instead, she opened the access control archive. Every system told the truth eventually. You just had to stop interrupting it. 8:14 a.m. She noticed the first pattern. Control ownership hadn't been reassigned in one motion. It had been diluted. One permission here. One reviewer there. One override justified as temporary. Temporary was the most permanent word in corporate language. 8:27 a.m. Vivian Hart highlighted 3 access changes that occurred within a 12-minute window, each approved by a different manager, each pointing towards strategy ops as a shared endpoint. No single hand, no single villain, just alignment. She added them to the timeline and left the owner field blank. Blank fields made auditors nervous. 8:46 a.m. Quinn sent a message without commentary, just a screenshot. A process flow chart updated overnight. Vivian's team name still appeared on it, but only at the bottom, as a receiver, not a decision maker. 8:49 a.m. Vivian Hart replied with 2 words. Saved. Thanks. She didn't reassure Quinn. Reassurance invited questions. Questions created noise. 9:03 a.m. She opened the vendor appendix again, the one no one read unless something had already gone wrong. This time, she read the footnotes beneath the footnotes. That was where legal teams buried intent. There it was. A clause amended 3 weeks earlier. Client-facing attribution may reflect internal operational structures for clarity. For clarity. Clarity for whom? 9:19 a.m. Vivian Hart cross-referenced the amendment date with the first appearance of the variance. They overlapped. Not exactly, but enough. She added a line to the timeline and marked it with a small dot instead of a check. Incomplete, but suggestive. 9:37 a.m. Her inbox refreshed again. This time it wasn't Gavin. It was Risk. Subject FYI, preliminary review scope. The email was polite, almost apologetic. They weren't asking her for input. They were telling her she wasn't needed. She read it once and archived it. Then she exported it. Silence worked best when it was documented. 10:02 a.m. Vivian Hart noticed something she hadn't expected. Her name had stopped appearing, not removed, just absent. Threads referenced prior oversight. Decks said legacy controls. People spoke in past tense without saying it out loud. Absence was already happening. They just didn't know it yet. And 10:21 a.m. She stood, stretched, and walked away from the desk without closing anything. Leaving things open invited assumption. Assumption created evidence. 10:47 a.m. When she returned, a new calendar invite sat waiting. External touchpoint, client confidence review. She wasn't on it, but the client was. That mattered. 11:03 a.m. Vivian Hart smiled for the first time that day. Not because she was winning, but because the system was accelerating itself. They were trying to outrun uncertainty. That never worked. 11:26 a.m. She called Quinn, not on the company line. Don't change anything, Vivian Hart said quietly. If someone asks, you're busy. If they insist, take notes. Quinn hesitated. Are you okay? 11:29 a.m. Vivian Hart answered, with the truth that sounded like calm. I'm exactly where I need to be. She ended the call before Quinn could respond. 12:04 p.m. She printed the timeline and laid the pages out on the table, left to right, not top to bottom. Stories like to move forward. Evidence preferred sequences. She placed the silver pen at the center, perpendicular to the pages, like a marker no one else could see. 12:18 p.m. She added one final entry before stepping away. Silence maintained, narrative stable, pressure externalizing. Then she closed the notebook. The trap was set. The story was locked. And she was no longer inside it, which meant the next movement wouldn't come from her. It would come from outside. 9:06 a.m. Vivian Hart learned the tone had changed before she learned the reason. The change arrived as a pause. Not a message. Not a summons. A pause where replies used to be. She stood at her kitchen window with coffee untouched, watching the reflection of her laptop screen go dim as it idled. Silence had weight now, the kind that bent conversations without touching them. 9:14 a.m. Quinn sent a single line. Client just asked who owns the reconciliation layer. No emoji, no hedging. Ownership questions never came first. They came after doubt. 9:17 a.m. Vivian Hart replied, Acknowledge receipt. Don't answer beyond documented ownership. Documented ownership was a moving target. That was the point. 9:26 a.m. The internal portal refreshed with a notice that looked routine until you read it twice. External review. Limited scope. Limited scopes were never limited. They were careful. 9:31 a.m. Vivian Hart opened the notice metadata. The request origin wasn't compliance. It was client assurance. That meant money had spoken. 9:38 a.m. She added 2 words to her timeline. Client origin trigger. Then beneath it, she drew a thin line forward, leaving the rest blank. Audits hated blanks. They filled them with questions. 9:52 a.m. An unfamiliar name appeared in her inbox. External domain, short signature. Subject, context request. The email was polite in a way internal emails never were. Vivienne, we're conducting a limited external review related to Q4 reporting consistency. Your name surfaced in early documentation. Would you be available to clarify control ownership and timing around post-close adjustments? Best, R. Klein. No accusations, no assumptions, just timing. 9:56 a.m. Vivian Hart didn't answer immediately. She opened the attachment instead. A single page, a scope outline. Her eyes went straight to the footnotes. That's where they'd put the question they weren't ready to ask out loud. Please confirm whether attribution language accurately reflects operational control during the adjustment window. There it was, language, not numbers. 10:03 a.m. Vivian Hart replied with 1 sentence and 1 attachment. Happy to clarify with documented versions. Please find attached a timeline of control ownership and language changes with timestamps. She didn't CC anyone. She didn't explain. She sent the mirror. 10:11 a.m. She exported the sent email and saved it. Then she waited again. Waiting was different now. It wasn't camouflage. It was leverage. 10:27 a.m. The internal messaging platform flickered back to life. A risk director asked a question in a channel that had been quiet all morning. Can someone confirm when the vendor appendix language was updated? No names attached. That meant everyone was watching. 10:33 a.m. Vivian Hart didn't answer. She didn't need to. The question itself was the pivot. 10:41 a.m. Another internal update, this one marked urgent. Board materials, revision. Required revision was corporate for something doesn't hold. 10:48 a.m. Quinn sent a photo taken discreetly from a screen. Slide 7 again. The same slide. The language had softened. Oversight lapse was gone. Replaced by process ambiguity during transitional period. Ambiguity was safer than blame. Safer for some. 10:55 a.m. Vivian Hart underlined one line on her printed timeline. Narrative retreat begins. She didn't smile. She checked alignment. 11:09 a.m. The external reviewer replied, "Thanks, Vivian. This is helpful. We may request a brief call to walk through the sequence." Sequence. Auditors loved sequences. Sequences didn't care about titles. 11:16 a.m. Vivian Hart responded, "Available." One word. No time offered. Let them choose. 11:38 a.m. The call invite arrived. Her name spelled correctly. Her title intact. 11:44 a.m. She joined exactly on time. Not early, not late. On the other end, the reviewer didn't waste breath. "We're trying to understand," he said, "how attribution moved faster than ownership." Vivian Hart didn't defend. She narrated dates, versions, footnotes. She read one clause aloud and then stopped. Silence did the rest. 12:07 p.m. The reviewer cleared his throat. "That clause wasn't disclosed to the client." "No," Vivian Hart said. "It wasn't." She let that be the last thing. 12:19 p.m. The call ended. No thanks. No reassurance. Just gravity shifting. 12:36 p.m. An internal announcement hit the portal. Pending review, certain process attributions will be temporarily adjusted. Temporarily. The most permanent word again. 12:49 p.m. Vivian Hart closed her laptop and placed the silver pen across the notebook, exactly where it had been before. The pivot was complete. Not because she'd pushed, because she'd stepped aside and let accuracy fall through the space she left. Absence wasn't the end, it was the mechanism. 8:18 a.m. Vivian Hart received the revised document without a meeting request attached. That alone told her everything. No glass room, no performance theater, just paper. Subject: updated separation terms. Review. She opened it slowly, like you do when you expect accuracy more than apology. The first page had changed tone. Not warmer, more precise. Her role description was intact now. No references to oversight lapse, no implied negligence. The language had shifted to something neutral and bloodless. Organizational realignment following third-party review. Realignment meant someone else had absorbed impact. 8:27 a.m. Vivian Hart scrolled. Severance extended. Non-disparagement mutual. Reference language standardized. And there it was, quiet, surgical. No attribution of fault related to Q4 reporting variance. No fault. Not forgiveness, exoneration. 8:34 a.m. She compared it side by side with the first version Gavin had slid across the table days earlier. She didn't need a highlighter. The differences were structural. Blame removed, ownership neutralized, timeline preserved. Accuracy had done its work. 8:41 a.m. Her phone rang. Gavin's name appeared. She let it ring once, twice. Then she answered. "Yes," Vivian Hart said. "Not hello." "Vivian," Gavin began, voice careful now. "I wanted to make sure you saw the updated terms. We're aligned on keeping this clean." Clean. The word sounded different when it was no longer a weapon. "I've seen them," Vivian Hart said. "They reflect the review." A pause. "Of course," Gavin said. "We appreciate your professionalism through all of this." Professionalism was what people called restraint after it outperformed them. 8:46 a.m. Vivian Hart ended the call without adding anything else. She didn't need closure. She had documentation. 9:02 a.m. She sent one email to HR, Legal, and Compliance. "Please confirm the attached reflects final terms. Upon confirmation, I'll return equipment and conclude access per protocol. Vivian." No gratitude, no commentary, just sequence. 9:19 a.m. Confirmation arrived. All parties CC'd. No edits requested. Consensus always looked quieter after scrutiny. 9:31 a.m. Vivian Hart powered down her laptop for the last time as an employee. She placed it carefully into the bag, then removed the silver USB and slipped it into her coat pocket. She didn't need it anymore, but she kept it anyway. Memory was a form of insurance. 9:44 a.m. She entered the building using the visitor badge, still labeled guest, and moved through security without being stopped. No one looked up. Absence had already normalized. 9:51 a.m. She returned her laptop, phone, and badge at the IT desk. The technician followed a checklist, eyes never meeting hers. "Sign here," he said. She signed with the silver pen. The line was straight. 10:03 a.m. Vivian Hart walked through the lobby one last time. The brushed steel words, clarity, control, confidence, caught the light differently now, not aspirational, defensive. 10:12 a.m. outside, she paused, not for reflection, but for timing. She waited until the revolving door completed its turn without her. Then she stepped away. No announcement followed. No farewell email. Just a subtle internal update later that afternoon. Process ownership updated per external review. Names removed. Structures adjusted. The system corrected itself without saying why. 10:37 a.m. Vivian Hart deleted the calendar remnants from her phone. Meetings vanished. Threads dissolved. She didn't block anyone. Blocking suggested fear. 11:04 a.m. Quinn sent a final message. "They rolled back the attribution language company-wide. Slide 7 is gone." Vivian Hart replied with 2 words. "Good. Take notes." 11:18 a.m. She stopped thinking about Lattice Bridge Capital entirely. That was the final metric. 3:11 p.m. The system logged the change without ceremony. No announcement, no apology. Just a line item buried inside an internal update. Control attribution standardized following external findings. No names attached. 3:26 p.m. A revised deck replaced the old one in the shared drive. Slide numbers shifted. The section once labeled Oversight no longer existed. Absence left space. Space demanded explanation. 3:44 p.m. Finance flagged a question they hadn't asked before. Why was ownership ever unclear? No one answered quickly. Speed had stopped working. 4:02 p.m. Risk opened a retrospective review, not mandated, just necessary. The kind that happened when silence felt heavier than disclosure. 4:19 p.m. An email thread reappeared from weeks earlier, pulled back into circulation by someone who hadn't been CC'd the first time. Footnotes resurfaced, so did timestamps. 4:37 p.m. The vendor appendix was amended again, this time with explicit attribution language and a disclosure note marked client-facing. Precision returned. Late. 4:58 p.m. A senior director asked off-record whether the prior narrative had overreached. That word traveled. 5:16 p.m. Gavin Rhodes stopped using the phrase oversight lapse altogether. He didn't replace it. He avoided it. Avoidance was admission in corporate dialect. 5:41 p.m. Quinn noticed something else. No one reassigned the controls again. They stayed where they were documented. Stability, finally earned. 6:03 p.m. The external reviewer closed the loop with a single sentence to legal. Attribution now aligns with operational reality. Reality was expensive when delayed. 6:27 p.m. Vivian Hart was nowhere in the system. No active access, no pending tasks, no narrative to correct. Just a clean gap where assumptions had collapsed. Silence wasn't surrender. It had been camouflage. And absence. Absence was the cleanest form of revenge. Lessons learned 1. Silence is not weakness. It is a strategic pause. When narratives are being written too fast, silence preserves accuracy. Speaking too early only helps the wrong version solidify. 2. Most corporate damage is done with language, not numbers. The data often stays the same. What changes is the wording around it. Learn to read footnotes, not headlines. 3. If blame arrives before evidence, someone is insulating themselves. Accountability that moves faster than facts is never about truth. It's about containment. 4. Ownership diluted is responsibility reassigned. When roles become ambiguous, consequences are being pre-positioned. Ambiguity is rarely accidental. 5. Documentation outlives authority. Titles expire. Emails, timestamps, and version histories don't. Systems remember what people deny. 6. Do not interrupt people while they are building a false story. Let it finish. Incomplete narratives are defensible. Completed ones collapse under scrutiny. 7. Audits don't hunt villains. They hunt inconsistencies. Precision attracts attention quietly. Emotion repels it. 8. Being right too loudly makes you expendable. Being accurate at the right moment makes you undeniable. 9. Professionalism is restraint that outperforms politics. When you don't react, others overcorrect. That overcorrection leaves fingerprints. 10. A clean exit is not retreat. It is leverage preserved. Leaving without noise forces the system to carry its own weight. 11. Absence creates pressure that presence never could. When the wrong person is gone, reality has nowhere left to hide. 12. The most ethical revenge leaves no fingerprints, only corrections. No humiliation, no spectacle, just truth returning to its proper place.